I'd just like to make the point that we're very fortunate that His Majesty has allowed us to use Buckingham Palace for this event, and I need to say that.
The heavy oak doors of the private apartments at Windsor Castle hold secrets. For centuries, the public believed that the British royal family operated as a single, harmonious unit, a machine of flawless precision. But history tells a different story. Behind the pageantry lies a complex network of power, duty, and deep ideological fractures. In May 2023, just days before the historic coronation of King Charles III, the absolute illusion of silence was shattered. It did not happen through an anonymous leak. It did not come from a disgruntled courtier. It came directly from the lips of the sovereign's own sister. Princess Anne sat down for a rare, international television interview with Canada's CBC network. The words she uttered sent an immediate chill through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. When asked about her brother's lifelong ambition to establish a slimmed-down monarchy, the Princess Royal did not offer the standard, diplomatic platitudes expected of the House of Windsor. Instead, she delivered a blunt, public rejection of the king's central strategy. She stated flatly that a slimmed-down court did not sound like a good idea from where she was standing. It was a moment of unprecedented candor, a moment that exposed a deep, hidden battle for the survival of the institution. To understand the profound mechanisms behind this royal rift, and to explore how the palace is managing its most critical structural crisis in modern history, one must look at the hard facts of the royal ledger. If you wish to remain informed on the deep, historic chapters of the monarchy and the verified truths of the British elite, subscribe to the Crown Dispatch now. Join us as we step past the curtain of royal public relations. To comprehend why Princess Anne's public descent was so structurally significant, one must first dismantle the myth of how the modern British monarchy maintains its grip on the public consciousness. The survival of the House of Windsor does not depend on the glitter of the imperial state crown. It does not depend on the gold state coach. It depends entirely on an unwritten contract between the sovereign and the civilian population. This contract is executed through a relentless, daily grind of public service. It is a system built on physical presence. For over 70 years, Queen Elizabeth II operated under a strict, mathematical philosophy. She famously declared that she had to be seen to be believed. This was not a superficial commentary on royal fashion or public appearances. It was a cold, calculated doctrine of political survival. The late Queen understood that in an egalitarian, democratic age, an hereditary institution can only justify its vast wealth and legal privileges by providing a tangible, visible service to the nation. This service was managed through an immense administrative network known internally within Whitehall and Buckingham Palace as the collective asset of the working royals. The system distributed the crushing weight of state duties across a broad, highly disciplined team. This team included not just the immediate heirs, but the monarch's siblings, aunts, uncles, and cousins. For decades, minor royals like the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, the Duke of Kent, and Princess Alexandra operated as the quiet, invisible workhorses of the British state. They did not occupy the front pages of the tabloids. They did not generate global media frenzies. Instead, they traveled to industrial towns, opened community hospitals, attended local civic anniversaries, and maintained the vital constitutional connections between the capital and the furthest provinces of the United Kingdom. When King Charles ascended the throne, he brought with him a fundamentally different philosophy of governance, influenced heavily by the modern, streamlined monarchies of continental Europe, most notably the houses of Orange-Nassau in the Netherlands and Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glücksburg in Denmark. Charles believed that the British model was dangerously bloated. He looked at the royal families of Scandinavia, who ride bicycles through public squares and operate with microscopic budgets, and believed that the British public would soon demand a similar reduction in royal expenditure. His lifelong ambition was the creation of a slimmed-down monarchy. This plan aimed to strip away the official status of extended family members, reducing the core team of working royals to a tiny, hyper-focused group consisting only of himself, Queen Camilla, and the Prince and Princess of Wales. The goal was to reduce the burden on the taxpayer, minimize the surface area for potential family scandals, and present a modern, corporate image of efficiency to a rapidly changing world. However, this corporate vision of a lean, centralized monarchy completely ignored the unique, sprawling constitutional architecture of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. Unlike the domestic, localized monarchies of Europe, the British sovereign is not merely the head of a single nation-state. The king is the constitutional head of 15 independent realms stretching across the globe, from Canada to Australia, Tuvalu to Jamaica. The king is also the symbolic leader of the Commonwealth of Nations, a massive voluntary association of 56 countries encompassing over 2.5 billion people. Furthermore, within the United Kingdom alone, the crown is tied to a vast web of civic, military, and charitable responsibilities. There are currently over 3,000 individual patronages, charities, and military regiments traditionally headed by a member of the royal family. These organizations rely on royal association for their prestige, their fundraising capability, and their institutional stability. When King Charles began executing his consolidation plan, the immediate result was not increased efficiency, but an immediate and severe administrative bottleneck. By systematically reducing the number of active working royals, Charles effectively cut the vital supply lines of royal influence. The numbers simply did not add up. A tiny team of 4 or 5 individuals cannot physically fulfill the constitutional, civic, and charitable demands of a global apparatus. According to detailed statistical analyses of the official court circular, the daily record of all royal engagements, the total output of the royal family began to drop precipitously following the transition of power. Minor charities that had enjoyed decades of direct, consistent royal support suddenly found themselves severed from the palace roster. Local civic leaders began to notice that requests for royal visits were being systematically declined by the Lord Lieutenants of the counties, cited due to a severe shortage of available family personnel. This structural vulnerability was precisely what motivated Princess Anne to break the traditional wall of palace silence during her landmark interview with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Anne did not speak out of personal ambition or a desire to protect her own position. As the Princess Royal, her status within the state was already firmly cemented by history and public respect. Rather, she spoke as a veteran strategist who had spent more than 50 years operating at the very coalface of royal duty. In 2023, the court circular revealed that Anne had completed 457 official engagements, once again outpacing every other member of the family, including the king himself. She understood, through raw empirical experience, the sheer physical toll required to keep the machinery of the monarchy functioning. When Anne looked at her brother's slimmed-down model, she did not see modernization. She saw a reckless dismantling of the family's structural defenses. She recognized that by shrinking the circle of working royals to a microscopic core, Charles was leaving the entire institution incredibly exposed to unexpected shocks. If a single key member of that tiny core were to become incapacitated through illness, injury, or personal crisis, the entire apparatus of the state would stall. There was no longer any structural redundancy left in the system. There were no backup gears to take the strain. The warning she delivered to the public was a chillingly accurate assessment of an institution running on fumes, pushing its remaining members to the absolute brink of physical exhaustion, while systematically abandoning the grassroots communities that formed the true foundation of its historical legitimacy. To fully understand the depth of this institutional crisis, one must analyze the legal and financial mechanisms that govern the working royals. The funding of the British monarchy is dictated by the Sovereign Grant Act of 2011, a complex piece of legislation that replaced the ancient civil list. Under this system, the Crown Estate, a vast portfolio of land and properties across the United Kingdom worth billions of pounds, surrenders its entire revenue to the British Treasury. In return, the government grants a percentage of that revenue back to the monarch to fund the official duties of the state, including palace maintenance, royal travel, and the staffing of the royal households. For decades, traditionalist critics within Parliament and the civil service have argued that the money spent funding the public engagements of minor royals represents an exceptional return on investment for the British economy. A single royal visit to a struggling regional city can generate millions of pounds in local press coverage, boost tourism, and validate the work of thousands of local volunteers. Yet, the modernizers surrounding King Charles focused heavily on a different political reality. They were deeply sensitive to the rising tides of Republican sentiment, the persistent criticisms from anti-monarchy groups like Republic, and the shifting economic landscape of a post-Brexit Britain navigating a severe cost-of-living crisis. The king's advisors believed that if the public saw a large number of distant royal cousins living in grace and favor apartments at Kensington Palace while receiving funding for chauffeured cars and state security, the institutional reputation of the crown would suffer catastrophic damage. Therefore, the decision was made to aggressively transition the monarchy into a corporate structure, where only those in the direct line of succession would receive public prominence. It was a strategy designed to survive the immediate, hostile political climate of the 24-hour news cycle, but it was a strategy that completely sacrificed the long-term, systemic stability of the throne. Princess Anne's philosophy, rooted deeply in the lessons taught to her by her father, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, stood in direct opposition to this reactive corporate model. Prince Philip had been the primary architect of the modern, post-war royal household. He understood that the monarchy could not survive simply by being an elite, aloof symbol of heritage. It had to be an active, functioning utility within the British Constitution. He instilled in Anne a profound sense of administrative realism. Anne knew that the strength of the crown did not reside in London alone. It resided in the agricultural shows of Yorkshire, the maritime charities of Scotland, the community groups of Northern Ireland, and the remote administrative outposts of the Commonwealth. By centralizing the family's operations exclusively around the king and the immediate heirs, Charles was effectively transforming the British monarchy into a localized London institution, losing its grip on the wider nation and the global realms. The fallout from this strategic shift began to manifest within the corridors of the civil service almost immediately. The Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of Cornwall, the two massive private landed estates that provide independent incomes to the sovereign and the heir apparent respectively, found themselves under immense pressure to adapt to the new regime's priorities. Staffing levels within the household offices were restructured. Long-serving courtiers who had spent decades managing the complex calendars of the extended royal family were quietly transitioned out of their roles. The institutional memory of the palace was being systematically erased to make way for a sleek, centralized management team. But as the administrative changes took hold, the real-world consequences became impossible to ignore. The remaining working royals found their calendars packed to absolute capacity. The spaces between engagements collapsed. The time required for deep, meaningful preparation was sacrificed for speed and volume. The family was no longer conducting deep, impactful visits that built lifelong institutional relationships. They were rushing from one televised event to the next, acting as superficial figureheads rather than dedicated patrons. This was the precise degradation of quality that Princess Anne had feared. She knew that once the public realized the royal family was merely going through the motions, performing for the cameras rather than engaging with the actual fabric of the nation, the ancient contract between the sovereign and the people would be permanently broken. As the nation approached the coronation summer, the tension between the king's office at Buckingham Palace and the Princess Royal's office at St. James's Palace reached a quiet but intense plateau. The two siblings, who had navigated the tumultuous decades of the late 20th century together, now stood on opposite sides of a profound constitutional debate. Charles, determined to be remembered as a bold reformer who saved the monarchy from economic criticism, refused to back down from his slimmed-down vision. Anne, equally determined to preserve the integrity of the crown for future generations, refused to soften her public and private warnings. The stage was set for a structural crisis that would soon be accelerated by forces completely beyond the palace's control, testing the modernizing theories of the king against the brutal, unyielding realities of human frailty and state duty. The administrative bottleneck created by the slimmed-down doctrine did not remain confined to the internal memos of Buckingham Palace. It quickly translated into a visible, public crisis of presence. As the initial months of the new reign unfolded, the calculated warnings delivered by Princess Anne began to manifest through the sheer, unyielding physics of the royal calendar. The institution was simply running out of individuals capable of executing the formal mechanisms of the state. Under the statutory terms of the Regency Acts of 1937 and 1953, the constitutional stability of the United Kingdom relies on a specific group of senior royals known as the Councillors of State. These individuals are legally empowered to step forward and act on behalf of the sovereign during times of illness, absence, or temporary incapacity, signing state documents, approving appointments, and ensuring the uninterrupted continuity of the British executive branch. Historically, this legal mechanism operated with a comfortable layer of structural redundancy. The group automatically included the consort of the sovereign and the next 4 individuals in the line of succession who had attained the age of majority. However, the modern reality of the Windsor family tree had created an unprecedented legal and political crisis for King Charles's corporate model. 2 of the primary individuals legally designated to hold these constitutional powers were Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, who had been permanently sidelined from public life following the catastrophic fallout of his legal controversies, and Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, who had voluntarily relinquished his status as a working royal to establish an independent media presence in California. This left the state in a highly precarious position. If both the King and the Prince of Wales were simultaneously incapacitated or traveling abroad, the constitutional machinery of the United Kingdom would effectively grind to a halt. To prevent a major constitutional crisis, Parliament was forced to pass the Councillors of State Act, a piece of emergency legislation that specifically expanded the roster to include Princess Anne and Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, for their lifetimes. This legal intervention was a public validation of Anne's strategic philosophy. It proved that despite the King's desire to shrink the visible footprint of the family, the actual survival of the state apparatus required the permanent, active participation of the old guard. The pressure on the remaining core team intensified significantly as the royal calendar entered a demanding period of diplomatic and state responsibilities. The Prince and Princess of Wales, who were being positioned by the modernizers as the primary face of the contemporary monarchy, found themselves juggling an exhausting portfolio of national initiatives, global tour, and the raising of their 3 young children. The modern corporate strategy relied entirely on the narrative that William and Catherine could carry the weight of the institution's future public appeal. But this strategy completely ignored the brutal reality of human vulnerability. When unexpected health challenges suddenly forced both the King and the Princess of Wales to temporarily step back from public duties, the entire architectural flaw of the slimmed-down monarchy was laid bare to a stunned global audience. With 2 of the most high-profile members of the core team suddenly unavailable, the vast, sprawling responsibilities of the British crown collapsed entirely onto the shoulders of Queen Camilla, Princess Anne, and Prince Edward. The transition was immediate and brutal. The court circular, which normally distributed engagements across a diverse team of a dozen working individuals, now showed the same 3 names repeating in an unbroken loop. Princess Anne, true to her reputation, increased her already grueling schedule, traveling thousands of miles across the country to cover the gaps left by the diminished core. She went from opening research facilities in London to attending military parades in Scotland, often completing multiple high-level engagements within a single 24-hour period. According to deep sources within the civil service, the atmosphere within the palace offices during this period was one of quiet, controlled panic. The King's modernizing advisors, who had previously championed the aggressive reduction of active family members, found themselves facing a logistical nightmare that they had completely failed to anticipate. The numbers simply did not add up. There were hundreds of charities begging for a royal presence to validate their major fundraising campaigns, dozens of foreign diplomats requiring formal audiences at St. James's Palace, and an increasingly anxious public demanding to see the visible continuation of the Crown's authority. The slimmed-down model had left the institution with 0 margin for error, 0 structural backup, and 0 resilience in the face of a standard human crisis. Anne's quiet, disciplined execution of these emergency duties was not accompanied by any public statements of triumph or self-satisfaction. She did not seek to say, "I told you so," to her brother or his modernizing team. Instead, her actions spoke with the absolute authority of empirical truth. Every mile she traveled, every hand she shook, and every state document she verified was a silent powerful refutation of the corporate, centralized model that Charles had sought to impose on the family. She proved that the monarchy cannot be managed like a modern corporation, cutting costs and consolidating departments to maximize efficiency. It is a historical utility that can only function through mass, distributed presence, and the unyielding physical sacrifice of its members. As the weeks turned into months, the sheer physical toll on the remaining working royals began to alter the internal dynamics of the palace. Senior aides began to express serious concerns about the long-term sustainability of the current operational model. Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, who had quietly taken on a massive portfolio of international youth awards and civic duties, was also showing signs of visible exhaustion. The remaining members of the Old Guard were being pushed to the absolute brink of their physical capacities, running a marathon at a sprinter's pace to keep the facade of royal continuity intact for a worried nation. The crisis also exposed a deep generational divide within the wider royal household. The younger team of advisors, who had spent years crafting the sleek, media-focused image of the modern monarchy, found themselves increasingly out of touch with the practical demands of the traditionalist demographic. This demographic, which forms the absolute bedrock of the Crown's domestic support in both the United Kingdom and the older Commonwealth realms, did not care about viral social media metrics or slickly edited video clips. They cared about the physical presence of the royal family in their local communities. They wanted to know that the historic values of duty, stoicism, and unbroken public service were being preserved by individuals who understood the gravity of their historical roles. Princess Anne became the ultimate symbol of this preservation. While the palace media machine scrambled to manage the complex public relations surrounding the family's health crises, Anne remained an island of absolute certainty in a sea of volatility. Her refusal to adopt modern PR strategies, her consistent use of decades-old royal wardrobe pieces, and her blunt, no-nonsense approach to public interactions endeared her deeply to the traditionalist audience. She was viewed not as a celebrity performing for an audience, but as a dedicated public servant executing an ancient constitutional duty with absolute fidelity. The lesson of this modern breakdown was clear to everyone operating within the high echelons of the British state. The slimmed-down monarchy had been tested in the fires of real-world adversity, and it had been found fundamentally wanting. It was a strategy designed for fair weather, built on the assumption that the core team would always remain perfectly healthy, perfectly aligned, and perfectly capable of handling an infinite workload. The moment that assumption was shattered by the realities of human frailty, the entire system collapsed, forcing the institution to rely on the very traditionalist structures and individuals that the modernizers had sought to push into the shadows of history. The strategic divide between King Charles's modern corporate vision and Princess Anne's traditionalist framework extended far beyond the pages of the court circular. It manifested as a direct, internal conflict over the physical and financial assets of the crown itself. When King Charles ascended the throne, he did not merely inherit a constitutional office. He became the steward of a vast, multi-billion-pound property portfolio. This portfolio includes historic palaces, private estates like Sandringham and Balmoral, and a sweeping collection of grace and favor residences. To the modernizing advisors who took control of the palace administration, these vast properties represented a severe financial liability and a potential public relations nightmare. In an era marked by intense economic scrutiny and a persistent cost-of-living crisis across the United Kingdom, the sight of empty, historic mansions maintained at public expense was viewed as politically indefensible. The king's proposed solution was a radical, corporate reorganization of the royal geography. The core strategy aimed to centralize the family's residential footprint into just a few hyper-efficient hubs, while quietly transitioning secondary estates into commercial assets or public museums. Plans were drafted to open larger sections of Buckingham Palace, Balmoral Castle, and Windsor Castle to paying tourists for extended periods of the year. Furthermore, a quiet but highly controversial review was initiated regarding the status of smaller legacy properties, such as Royal Lodge, Bagshot Park, and various private cottages scattered across the royal parks. The goal of the modernizers was simple: reduce maintenance costs, generate independent revenue streams, and project an image of an institution that was actively modernizing its fiscal footprint to match 21st century corporate standards. Princess Anne watched this sweeping real estate audit with profound skepticism. To her, these historic properties were not mere real estate assets to be balanced on a corporate spreadsheet. They were the physical embodiment of the Crown's permanent, unyielding presence across the nation. For generations, the seasonal migrations of the royal family, from the winter gatherings at Sandringham to the summer residences at Balmoral, had played a vital role in binding the different regions of the United Kingdom to the central authority of the throne. These estates served as operational bases that allowed the family to embed themselves deeply within regional communities, engaging with local farmers, estate workers, and civic leaders far away from the insulated, London-centric atmosphere of Whitehall. According to detailed reporting by seasoned royal biographers, the internal tension reached a boiling point over the proposed management changes for properties deeply tied to the personal memory of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. When suggestions emerged from the King's office that certain residential wings should be aggressively commercialized, or that long-serving estate staff should be rationalized under new corporate contracts, the Princess Royal stepped forward to challenge the trajectory. Anne's unique position within the family structure granted her the ultimate privilege of candid dissent. She understood, better than any corporate consultant, that the true value of the monarchy's heritage lies in its unbroken continuity, not its commercial efficiency. The disagreement soon extended into a battle over the management of the royal collections and the allocation of charitable patronages attached to specific regions. For decades, the Princess Royal had maintained her primary administrative headquarters at St. James's Palace, while operating her private residence at Gatcombe Park in Gloucestershire as a highly functional, independent agricultural hub. She had consistently managed her operations with a lean, dedicated staff, demonstrating that true fiscal responsibility did not require the wholesale dismantling of traditional royal protocols. When the centralized administration in London attempted to absorb regional royal operations into a singular, corporate management structure, Anne resisted the consolidation. She argued that local visibility and distinct regional identities were essential to maintaining the public's trust. This policy disconnect also highlighted a fundamental disagreement regarding the Crown's relationship with the British civil service and the Treasury. The modernizers believed that by proactively shrinking the royal footprint and presenting a highly efficient budget to Parliament, they could secure the long-term political survival of the sovereign grant. They feared that any public perception of royal indulgence would strengthen the arguments of Republican lawmakers during upcoming funding reviews. However, Anne's traditionalist philosophy held that preemptively stripping away the historic dignity and widespread presence of the Crown was a form of political surrender. She maintained that the public did not want a corporate, cut-price monarchy that operated like a government department. They wanted an institution that represented a stable, timeless alternative to the transient, polarized world of modern politics. As the internal debates over estate policy and administrative consolidation intensified behind palace walls, the practical limitations of the King's corporate model became glaringly apparent to the wider civil service. The consolidation plans had been built on the assumption that a smaller, centralized structure could seamlessly handle the vast constitutional workload of the state. But as the physical operations on the ground began to experience severe delays, and as regional communities began to voice quiet resentment over the cancellation of long-standing royal traditions, the corporate strategy faced an institutional wall. The modernizers had successfully reduced administrative costs on paper, but in doing so, they had severely degraded the invisible network of loyalty and tradition that had protected the House of Windsor through the tumultuous decades of the modern era. The structural pressures that defined the opening chapters of King Charles III's reign eventually forced a quiet, profound reassessment within the high echelons of the British state. The modern corporate theory, which assumed a global, ancient institution could be managed like a lean 21st century business, had been tested against the harsh realities of human limitation and administrative demand. The results of that test were undeniable. The systematic reduction of the active working royal roster had not delivered a more secure, streamlined monarchy. Instead, it had created a highly fragile, overstretched apparatus that was uniquely vulnerable to unexpected disruption. The very safety net that had protected the throne for 7 decades had been prematurely cut away, leaving the sovereign isolated at the exact moment the crown needed its widest distributed strength. As the palace administration began navigating the long-term stabilization of the household, the pragmatic philosophy long championed by Princess Anne moved from a position of marginalized dissent to the absolute center of strategic planning. The structural reconciliation did not occur through dramatic public declarations or sudden policy reversals. It happened through the quiet, calculated restoration of traditional protocols. Civil servants within Whitehall and the Lord Lieutenants of the counties began adjusting the royal calendar to once again incorporate the invaluable support of the extended family. The minor royals, who had been pushed toward the periphery to satisfy a modern aesthetic, were quietly brought back into the active rotation of public duty, stepping forward to re-anchor the crown's presence in regional communities and stabilizing the thousands of vacant patronages that had threatened to fade from the official roster. This quiet recalibration highlighted the timeless truth that Princess Anne had sought to preserve during her landmark public and private interventions. The strength of the British monarchy has never resided in its ability to adapt to transient corporate trends or to chase the fleeting approval of modern media metrics. Its power lies entirely in its permanence, its stoicism, and its unyielding execution of a timeless contract with the public. It is a historical utility designed to survive political crises, economic depressions, and social revolutions by acting as a stable, duty-bound alternative to the volatile and polarized world of contemporary politics. By trying to make the institution look more like a corporation, the modernizers had risked stripping away the very mystique and widespread physical presence that made it valuable to the nation in the first place. For the traditionalist demographic across the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, those dedicated viewers who value the quiet dignity and unbroken service of the Elizabethan era, the preservation of these core values remains non-negotiable. They do not look to the crown for corporate efficiency or modern celebrity culture. They look to the throne for an unbroken link to their own history, a visible symbol of national continuity that remains unchanged while the world around it shifts. Princess Anne's unwavering commitment to this traditionalist model has cemented her legacy not merely as the hardest-working royal, but as the primary custodian of the crown's historical integrity. Her actions have proven that in the grand narrative of the House of Windsor, the survival of the dynasty relies not on the radical dismantling of its ancient foundations, but on the disciplined, fearless defense of its foundational promise. The final path forward for the modern British state is now defined by a delicate, necessary balance between the king's vision for a contemporary realm and the princess royal's defense of a timeless tradition. The lesson of the recent breakdown has been thoroughly absorbed by the palace inner circle. The institution now understands that it cannot shrink its way to survival. As the House of Windsor moves deeper into this uncharted era, the unseen battle for its soul has resolved into a practical truth. To remain relevant in a changing world, the crown must never lose its grip on the historical ground that made it stable. The sovereign's shadow is no longer a symbol of internal division, but a protective shield, ensuring that the ancient contract between the monarch and the people remains unbroken for generations to come.